Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the press who've come here to attend this event announcing the Rhode Island Citizens for Responsible Government campaign to oppose the Constitutional Convention ballot question in November. My name is James Parisi. I'm a field representative with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals, and I'm treasurer of Rhode Island Citizens for Responsible Government. I'd like to start by thanking Planned Parenthood of Southern New England for hosting us here today. Article 14 of the Rhode Island Constitution requires that a question be put on the ballot every 10 years, asking voters the question, shall there be a convention to amend or revise the Constitution? That question will be on this year's ballot. The last time Rhode Island had a constitutional convention was 1986. In fact, that was the last time any of the 50 states had a constitutional convention. 20 years ago, the question was rejected by a 52 to 48% vote. 10 years ago, the question was defeated on a 55 to 45% vote. Some of us who had come together 10 years ago to oppose the ballot question a decade ago began conversations a couple of months ago about putting the group back together again this year, knowing that the question was likely to be on the 2024 ballot. Thus, the Rhode Island Citizens for Responsible Government was formed to pose the ballot question coming up in November. Rhode Island Citizens for Responsible Government is a coalition of organizations representing a wide cross-section of Rhode Islanders. We have labor unions and civil rights groups. We have women's groups and minority groups. We have organizations protecting reproductive health and immigrant workers. We are joined in a common belief that a constitutional convention poses a significantly more opportunity for harm than it does for good, for a variety of reasons that are going to be articulated by our speakers today. So starting us off, we have 4 speakers planned. The first speaker is Vimala Donna Phongsavan. She is the chair of the Rhode Island Citizens for Responsible Government, and she is the senior director for external affairs here at Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. Vimala?
Thanks, Jim, and good morning, everyone. I'm Vimala Phongsavan, Senior Director of External Affairs at Planned Parenthood of Southern New England, and also the chair of the Rhode Island Citizens for Responsible Government Coalition. This November, Rhode Island voters will be asked whether to hold a constitutional convention. We are here today to speak out in strong opposition to this proposal, which will be question 1 on this year's ballot. A constitutional convention opens the floodgates for special interest money to come into our state in a dangerous attempt to strip away the civil rights and protections currently afforded to all Rhode Islanders. Those rights include access to abortion and other reproductive health care. This is not what Rhode Islanders want. A majority of Rhode Island voters believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases, and our state has made incredible progress over the past 5 years to make abortion care more accessible. And that's because Rhode Islanders trust women, our family members, our neighbors, our friends, to make the decisions that are best for themselves. We believe that people in our communities deserve privacy in their medical decisions. Rhode Islanders cannot go backwards in our work to ensure that everyone has the ability to control our own bodies, our own lives, and our own futures. Yet that is just what could happen with a constitutional convention. The last time one was held in 1986, the convention ended up proposing 2 anti-abortion constitutional amendments, one of which passed. Now more than ever, when reproductive rights are under attack across the country, Rhode Islanders must remain vigilant in protecting and expanding access to this critical health care for all people in the Ocean State. Let's be clear, anti-abortion opponents were never satisfied with overturning Roe. Over the last 2 years, we've watched as they've strategically attacked sexual and reproductive health care on all fronts. They've banned abortion in 21 states and tried to use the courts to restrict access to mifepristone, a safe and effective drug used for medication abortion. Next, they are coming for birth control, gender-affirming health care, and IVF, and so much more. They are using every tool in their toolbox, including pouring out-of-state special interest money into ballot questions like the one here in Rhode Island to push their narrow ideology on us and exert control over our bodies and our lives. But we won't let them win. Together, we are building a strong and diverse coalition of Rhode Island voices speaking out to educate voters on the importance of defeating the Constitutional Convention and the direct threat it poses on our established rights, civil rights. Planned Parenthood of Southern New England is proud to join in this effort, and we will never stop fighting until everyone has the ability to make decisions about their own reproductive lives and futures without political interference. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Famala. Our next speaker is a stalwart supporter of worker rights and here in Rhode Island. It's Patrick Crowley, who's the Secretary-Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. Take the podium, Patrick.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Patrick Crowley. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. On behalf of the 80,000 union members across the state of Rhode Island, we're happy to join this coalition and will be strongly urging all working people to vote no on question 1. Rhode Island is a labor state. We are proud of our union heritage. We are proud of the laws that we have enacted to protect basic rights of working people, whether they're union members or not. And we see a threat to those rights. We see outside corporate money ready to pounce and undo the hard work that many of the people in this room have done over the last decades to ensure the basic freedoms of working people, the right to form a union, the right to advocate at the workplace, the right to make sure that working people are paid a decent wage, the right to health care, the right to make sure that the civil rights that all workers enjoy, including the right to bodily autonomy, are protected as we move forward. That's why this is a working person's issue. That's why this is a union issue. We need to make sure that Rhode Island laws are written by Rhode Islanders, that it's our voice that is heard loud and clear, not Wall Street, not the out-of-state corporate interests, not the big banks. Rhode Islanders should decide the direction of our state, and that's why a constitutional convention is a direct threat to the rights that we have fought so hard for. So on behalf of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, our 275 affiliates, and our members that live and work everywhere from Westerly to Woonsocket, we're going to do everything that we can to make sure Rhode Islanders get out and vote no on question 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. The ACLU is a premier civil rights organization here in the state of Rhode Island. They were a central player in the coalition 10 years ago to defeat the Con ballot question, and they are back in our coalition this year. Joining us at the podium now is Stephen Brown, the Executive Director of the ACLU.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this news conference. My name is Stephen Brown. I'm Executive Director of the ACLU of Rhode Island. And let there be no mistake about 2 things. The calling of a constitutional convention is a frightening prospect for those concerned about civil rights, and the work of the convention would be as political as any session of the General Assembly. I don't make these predictions lightly, but I don't make them hypothetically either. They are plainly borne out by history of our last Constitutional Convention in Rhode Island in 1986. Nobody should be fooled by those who claim it will be otherwise. You've heard some talk about one of the main things that came out of the 86 convention, which had to do with an amendment declaring that life begins at conception. That was overwhelmingly defeated by the voters, but as Famala noted, there was actually a second anti-abortion constitutional amendment that came out of that convention, and it remains in our state constitution to this day. Unfortunately, that was not the only attack on civil rights at that convention. The voters also approved the constitutional amendment restricting the fundamental right to bail for people charged with certain drug offenses, an amendment that promoted the state's very unfortunate role in the mass incarceration epidemic that swept the country in the 1980s. In addition, the convention proposed, and the voters approved, an amendment that significantly expanded the number of people who lost their right to vote because of a criminal record. 20 years later, it was the General Assembly, not a convention, that restored voting rights to those tens of thousands of individuals. There's absolutely no reason to believe that a constitutional convention in 2026 would be any more sympathetic to civil rights and civil liberties than the one in 1986. Now, what about the politics? Here too, the 1986 convention offers a lot of important lessons. Despite the Pollyanna hopes that were heard back then in support of a convention, and the same ones we hear today from supporters, that it would be a people's convention, free of the politics of the legislature, it's worth looking at the facts. Consider the makeup of the convention itself. Legislators at that time made a vow that none of them would run for a seat in the convention, and they were true to their word. But who did run and get elected? 7 former legislators, the relatives of 4 sitting legislators, including the son and the sister of the Speaker of the House. At least 8 people who had previously held another political office, and at least 10 current or former Democratic or Republican Party committee members. In addition, no fewer than 17 delegates to the convention used the convention as a stepping stone to run for the General Assembly the same year that the convention was being held. As for the political machinations that occurred in the convention, where even the order of the ballot questions was mired in politics, that we can save for another day. There are about a dozen other states that have a constitutional provision like Rhode Island, requiring periodic votes on whether to hold a constitutional convention. It is telling that since 1986, not one state has voted to do so. I'm inclined to believe that it's because those states took a look at what happened in Rhode Island in 1986 and learned the lesson not to follow that lead. I'm hopeful that as they've done the last 3 times, Rhode Island voters too will reject this latest call for a convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. And before I call our final speaker, I just want to make a note that after our 4th speaker, I'm going to ask all the speakers to come up here in case there are a couple of questions before we finish up today. As I had said earlier, we have a very diverse organization, a lot of different labor, civil rights groups, community groups, including the Latino Policy Institute, and we're pleased to have Awilda Reynoso, who's a policy associate for the LPI, joining us at the podium today. Come on.
Good morning. My name is Awilda Reynoso Lopez, and I am a policy associate at the Latino Policy Institute. We are a part of this coalition opposing a constitution and convention, which will be question number 1 on the ballot this November. At LPI, we have spent the last decade working tirelessly to protect and uplift some of Rhode Island's most vulnerable populations. Our communities, particularly those of colors and those experiencing poverty, have made significant strides in gaining the rights and protections they deserve. However, a constitutional convention threatens to unravel these hard-earned gains. One stark example is the Cover All Kids law passed in 2022. This critical legislation ensures that all children in Rhode Island, regardless of their immigration status, have access to health care. This law is a lifeline for thousands of children, providing them with the health care they need to thrive and succeed. The Constitutional Convention could put this law in jeopardy, threatening the health and well-being of these children and their families. Communities of color and poor communities often bear the brunt of such political shifts. Historically, these communities have faced systemic barriers and discrimination that have kept them from accessing the same opportunities as others. We cannot allow a constitutional convention to open the door to policies that would disproportionately impact these vulnerable populations. We have made significant progress, but our work still needs to be completed. We must continue to build on our successes and ensure that all Rhode Islanders, regardless of their background, have a fair shot at a healthy, prosperous future. A constitutional convention risks setting us back and undoing the progress we have fought to achieve. Let's stand together to protect our communities and say no to question 1 this November. Thank you.
Thank you, Awilda. And want to come back up, Patrick, Stephen, Bumala. We want them to pose for a pretty picture, and then we'll field any questions from the press if there are any.
Do the tighten up here.
Oh, I have one.
Go ahead.
Did anything good come out of the '86 convention?
Well, they
I
did
need you in
pass-
front of the microphone.
The '86 convention did pass an amendment establishing the Ethics Commission. But again, it was the General Assembly, not the convention, that passed, approved, and the voters approved, constitutional amendment making sure that the legislators themselves were subject to the Ethics Commission. The Supreme Court had interpreted it otherwise, and the General Assembly took it upon itself to make themselves subject to it. So even one good thing that they did had to be corrected by the General Assembly. A number of other provisions that were passed by the convention and defeated by the voters ended up getting approved by the General Assembly and the voters later on, including judicial selection, legislative pay, and a few other provisions that the voters rejected at the time, but when the General Assembly took action, they actually supported it.
Thank you.
I'm guessing you're going to be spending some money here. How much do you anticipate having to spend to run this campaign?
Yeah, so this is going to be a grassroots campaign, and we are going to be raising money. The Rhode Island AFL-CIO has already contributed $5,000 to the effort. But make no mistake, we are going to be outspent if the corporate money is allowed to flow into Rhode Island. There's just no way that, $10 contributions from working people or $20 contributions and low-dollar contributions to people like the Planned Parenthood or Latino Policy Institute is ever going to compete against someone like the Koch brothers who can write the six-figure check without blinking an eye. So yeah, we are going to be raising money, and if you want to learn how to contribute, you can go to our website, which will be part of the conversation afterwards.
Now, let me just ask you, I'm looking at all your signs say reject, question 1. Is it a yes or no question when it turns up on the ballot? Or, would you say no?
Approve or reject.
Yeah, the language of the question will be approve or reject.
Okay.
So that's why the way we're asking people to think about this question is reject question 1.
So, and anyone can handle this. You're all speaking about the potential for conservative or corporate or right-wing movements to take over a convention. But there's obviously nothing to prevent all of your groups from putting up candidates from progressives and left-leaning people from becoming delegates and running on a whole host of progressive ideas and constitutional ideas that have been floated over the last several decades. Why not do that and just run and actually pass the things you want and defeat the things at the convention that you don't want instead of shutting down the convention at the beginning?
Let me start, Patrick, and then I'll see if anyone else wants to answer. Make no mistake, we are preparing for the bad news, that just in case this does pass. We have already started planning for that. Our lead organizer, our field director for the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, Autumn Guillard, has already been tasked. We will run a union member in every single district. Make no mistake about it. We're not going to let the corporate powers take away our rights. But we are fundamentally opposed to a constitutional convention because we think it is a primary job of democracy to make sure these decisions are made in the General Assembly through the regular legislative process. So that's why, we're not jumping up and down to make sure that we pass a constitutional convention this year. We want to make sure that the rights that we have are protected, and we think the General Assembly process is the right way to do it. Anyone else want to say?
Are there things you would otherwise like to see happen in a constitutional convention? Any of you? Nothing good would come of it, you said?
There are 150 amendments one could easily come up with. In fact, in the 1986 convention, there were 322 resolutions introduced. We're not going to see 322 resolutions on any ballot. So there's going to be a lot of politicking to decide which of all these wonderful ideas that people have will actually get approved by the convention and then get approved by the voters. And as you heard from Patrick, the moneyed interests have much greater opportunity to control and decide which of those questions will actually end up on the ballot, and that's one of the key reasons that we're here opposing that approach to amending the Constitution.
I'll just briefly add, we all recognize there could be some positive developments coming out of the convention. I mean, I'm a teacher union guy, and getting a constitutional right to strike would be a real neat thing to have debated at the Constitutional Convention. But we all recognize we're all living under the same rules of Citizens United, where there's unlimited money that can be spent. And we believe that our opponents have the ability to spend way more than we do, as Patrick articulated. That's why when you balance the possibility of positive versus the possibility of harmful things, we all recognize that the possibility for harmful things is paramount, and that's why we ought to reject the Constitutional Convention in the first place. And finally, we're all mindful that the Rhode Island General Assembly can and has moved constitutional amendments on the ballot, and if there are some things we want to all coalesce around, we'll work with the General Assembly on those issues in the future.
One other quick point I'd make is that ballot questions are more often than not used as a way to deny minority rights. You're putting these sometimes critical, controversial, divisive issues on a ballot, and it not only leads to moneyed interest coming in, but it can appeal to some of the baser instincts of voters when you deal with, crime issues, immigration issues. We've heard that, we've seen that. It's a real legitimate concern, and that's another reason to oppose this approach for making laws in the most fundamental document that runs our state.
All right, seeing no other questions, thank you all very much for coming.
Thanks.